cyborgs. Joining Moon, we have Ghislane Boddington from Body Data Space, and our great moderator for this panel from Virtual Futures, Luke Mason. Come on in, Luke. And you may take whichever one you would like.
Hey.
Take it away, Luke.
Yeah, thanks. I'm gonna have some food there.
So, how are we doing? Look, I know they're serving alcohol outside now, so I have to ask that question again. How are we doing? Okay, all right, I'll take that. So, my name is Luke Robert Mason, and I have to tell you that reports of our cyborg future are somewhat greatly exaggerated. At least the sorts of promises that we had when we first tried to come up with this idea of the cyborg in the mid-90s was really related to the obsolescence of the human body. You see, in the mid-90s, they saw the emergence of this hyper-threading process of connectivity, otherwise known as the internet, and suddenly humans got very scared. They went, how are we going to upgrade ourselves to deal with this new complex and digital environment? In what ways will we have to attach new devices to our very slow bodies, our brains that run equivalent to 1400 cc engines, or our bodies that are purely bipedal, that cannot deal with these new virtual environments? But since the turn of the 21st century, the definition of the cyborg has changed, and the two incredible pioneers that we have on the stage now will show that the cyborg is no longer about a fear of technology, and instead about extending ourselves into new understandings of this actualized reality, this new environment. And I want to start by asking Ghislane Boddington, who really has been a pioneer for over 25, possibly more years in this space. I don't want to give anything away. And you have really been looking at how humans and technology interface through this thing called the Internet of Bodies. So could you explain that to the Pioneers audience?
Yes. Actually, just to say, like Moon, I'm also coming from a dance background, and I started to work with technologies in the early 90s. And very much because I wanted to make sure that we could connect to each other and that we could connect across the world. So we did a lot of experimenting with different tech in the body, and particularly with telepresence, connecting stages around the world to make sure we could do performances together between London, Kyoto, London, Helsinki, and looking at the virtual physical blending of the body. But our key thing has always been that the body should be at the center of the technology, that the body is the interface, that technology should be complementing and working with us, enhancing us, adding to us. And that's the route we've taken into the tech scene.
When we hear that phrase, cyborg, we're so quick to think about putting technology in and onto our bodies so that we can interact with these digital environments. But Moon, what I love about what you do is what you shared with us on stage, which is this idea of revealed reality, where Ghislane is connecting humans across the web. You're connecting humans to the environment. And could you explain just a little more detail of what revealed reality is?
Yeah, actually, it started a bit of as a joke. Because everyone was doing virtual reality, augmented reality, and then we were like, well, we did RR, like real reality. And then it was like, well, more than, and actually it became like, no, actually, because what is real, no, it really felt like revealing, because our perception of the environment, it really depends on the senses. You can be in the same space with a dog and a bee, and the perception of that space is completely different because of the senses they have. So I think it's really exciting. For me, I see that cyborg art is a bit like an exploration of our own planet. And actually, the word cyborg, it was created by Kleins and Klein, no? And actually, it defined humans and modified themselves in order to survive in other environments. So we think maybe we should modify ourselves to really understand where we are, where we live.
To have a greater understanding almost of our own environment. And Ghislane, I want to turn to you to really talk about the impact adding technology to the body has. So when we think about creating the cyborg, we think about the plethora of technologies from insidables, embeddables, ingestibles, and wearables.
Yes.
I mean, you've worked with many of these forms of technology, and as you've done that, how has it changed your perception of what the human body and the human brain is and could be?
Well, I think we really got to understand that we're in a Western context here, and we have an overemphasis on the brain. We talk about the brain a lot. There's a lot of work done with tech in the brain today, but what we need to do is to keep a much more holistic view, a kind of figure of 8, which actually works between the body and brain. 80% of our communication is through the body. We sense in our different ways through the body. So what we've been really exploring is that sense enhancement through technology, the hypersensory body, and how that can take us towards a more intimacy scenarios, to love, to sensualities, with the body at the center. So enhancing ourselves as human beings, connecting to each other, hopefully potentially in the future, the Internet of Bodies would be, if I had an implant, which I will do at some point, you and I would be able to connect across distance and time and message each other vibrations of goodwill or whatever. Forget the happy emoticon. We could actually be sending each other really special messages.
That word difference, I think, is so important in what you've just said. And with the Cyborg Foundation, there's many folks like yourself, Moon, who are experimenting with their senses. And they do that through the Cyborg Foundation. And part of the ethos there seems to be to embrace, encourage, and engineer a broad spectrum of different types of devices and different types of new senses. Could you talk a little bit about why difference and personal choice is so important when it comes to designing these devices to create these future cyborgs?
Yeah, I guess what we're talking about, no, that for us, or at least for me, the main thing is to experiment. I guess that's why we do it as an art form, because when you do art, you don't think about, well, I mean, that's not a bad thing, but usually, I guess artists and philosophers, we more wonder about the world, and then there's more practical people like bringing solutions. But actually, when you wonder, maybe you will find a solution, just another way to do it. So when you do art, it allows you to experiment and to do things that maybe they're not as practical, but then allows you to see things in another perspective. No, it's like translating what happens through this art and through the experimentation. And this is what I guess for me it's very important that I don't have a specific aim. We don't know what will happen. We don't know if it's going to be bad consequences or no. We just do it and experiment, and then we'll see. So I think, and also what we do, what we said. No, it's like, I think it's beautiful. For me, it was interesting to feel the seismic activity I end up with the seismic activity because I dedicate to movement, and this brought me to that. But I think the beautiful thing is that everyone can decide what they want to perceive. I mean, there's so many things, no? Like for me, it was relevant movement. For my friend, the weather. But what would you like to sense? No? How we can decide how we want to evolve and how we want to exist, and what organs do we want to have, and what senses.
Well, that freedom of choice element is going to be so important, but some of these devices, they're coming out of the arts context,
yes,
and they're entering industry, and with that, it brings some ethical challenges, it brings some challenges of cyborg rights, perhaps, and I know, Ghislane, you've been dogmatically focused on looking at what some of those issues might be.
Well, I'm a personal data ownership believer, so I do believe my heartbeat is mine, and I think we are in an era now where personal data is one of the most valuable things for all sectors, business, medicine, research, etc. It is the big data of value for the next few decades. And so we do need to talk about these things. We have microchipping happening in a variety of different ways. I've just been involved in microchipping at Mobile World Congress with Bank Sabadell, who are doing microchips towards finance. So you get a tiny little grain of rice in here. You can do transactions into your bank account through your laptop. And equally, there's several other examples of workplace microchipping happening, and Swedish Rail do little microchips, which are actually used instead of season cards by businessmen, who just, on the train, they just hold their hand out like this, and the train ticket person swipes it with their iPhone, whatever it is, and they've got their season ticket sorted. So it's coming into a practical use, but with that, the ethics is definitely got to be discussed. who does own that data? And where's a win-win scenario for all of us? How do we actually move forward in a way where personal data isn't, as possibly in China or other examples, being used without our permissions in ways that we don't understand, and maybe being manipulated against us in different ways? So there are not so much regulations happening yet. This is very difficult. All these universal regulation areas we know are complex. But at a high level, there's a lot of discussion happening. And at our level, there's a lot of discussion happening. So something's got to come through in the middle of this.
Just by show of hands, who would have some form of technology surgically implanted into their body, such as a microchip or RFID tag?
Yeah.
All right, somebody take note. There'll be a guy outside later, or maybe in the bar later. The question I have to ask is when it comes to designing these sorts of technologies, both of you are creators at heart, where do you start? Do you start with the body first, or do you start with the technology first? And Moon, I have to ask you, the work you do with the Cyborg Foundation, is it driven by the availability of certain sensors which are now being miniaturized, or does it start with a discussion of what would I really want to feel, what would I really want to experience?
In my experience, and then what we do in workshops and in the lab, it's also about what is out there. Because actually, I don't know about technology at all. I know that I work with technology, but actually, when I never been interested in just in technology. Actually, when I was a teenager, I was very hippie, and there was a phase that I was actually anti-technology. It's when I understood that I could use it to have a deeper connection with the planet and to use it in a more natural way, then I liked it. But for me, it doesn't. But it's very personal. It's not like it doesn't inspire me to see just the technology. It inspires more to look at the Earth, and especially other species, because sometimes we don't need to think of. Or at least for me, it's like difficult to think about science fiction or something. Like if you look at nature, like other species, I mean, they fly, they perceive ultraviolet, infrasound, even immortality already exists in nature. There's a jellyfish that keeps generating. So what we think it's a natural, actually is very natural. So it's our main inspiration.
And Ghislane, I want to ask you the same question. That process of creating these experiences, I mean, where does it start for you as an artist, as a creator?
No, it's definitely started with the body and with natural movement and with an understanding that, yes, it's a very exciting era of time. I started this work in the early 90s, so we were going well into this digital era, and it's like, yes, this must be a positive thing for us, and it must complement us, but we need to hold on to our natural movement, our natural bodies. We don't, I believe, need to be encumbered by heavy wearables, by VR headsets, which are actually fairly disembodying, particularly for collective and group action. So I'm very interested in collective embodiment and how we enhance that through data immersion. So a lot of what we do is actually in domes where people move around together and actually create generative audiovisual works or creating questions and answers and connecting domes across the world. So there's a chance for us to move as we move technology internally, and we have much technology in us already. There's over 200 medical implants, some of them quite complex. Many of you will know people who have, contraception implants, or even some complex ones like deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's and motor neuron diseases. Technology is moving inside us, soft robotics, many other things, nanorobotics are being used in medicine. Let's use that. If it can data transmit, if it can enable our lives better, enhance us in a way which maintains our natural selves, then I think that's when we start to be in control of it rather than it telling us what to do.
I have to ask, Moon, the experience of dealing with these implants, it's durational. You've had the seismic sensors since I think about 2013, so almost 6 years. And I just wonder, have you noticed any changes in your body and your brain over that period? David Eagleman's lab, who's doing certain forms of sensory input, is looking at how it affects neuroplasticity. I know your colleague, Neil Harbisson, now dreams in sonochromatic dreams because of his implants. It's having a fundamental effect and change on his brain. I just wonder if you're noticing those effects or seeing any of those effects in any of your colleagues.
Yes, definitely. That's why, but it's more a feeling. I haven't gone through the scan and actually looked of the brain, but definitely that's when it becomes a new sense, when this really forms part of you, and it becomes a sense because sometimes I'm very stressed, I don't even notice, and when I'm more relaxed, I can feel it more. So, and I'm more aware that when there's a big one, there's like these waves. But also, what we talk about it, no, it's not so much about the body for us. It's about the mind, as you said. It's like we use our aim is to modify the mind and our perception, and in order to use that, we use the body. But I don't think I'm a body hacker, or I modify. I modify my body, but this is not my aim. So yeah, the main is to modify the mind and how we perceive it.
It's so interesting that you have this focus and interest on the mind, because I know with you, Ghislane, you don't see a distinction between mind-body split, and I just wonder how if you could explain that for us and what that means for the way in which you create your work.
I think in myself, I definitely don't feel that I think separately than I feel. And I think a lot of my thought processes come from what I'm feeling. And I think that's a fact, And that's why I mentioned about
the feelings,
communication.
Just like some people... some people say that we are body hackers, and we are, but compared to the like the community of body hackers, that's why
it's very different, And neither of us talking about downloading the brain and the body being, as you mentioned at the beginning of this discussion, the body being obsolete. Body's really important. The body's the most important thing we have, and our brains and bodies working together and communicating and making friendships and these special parts of our lives that are, you think about it, we have so much negativity in the world and so many tough things in the newspapers every day, whether it's murders or terrorism, etc. But in fact, 99.9% of us walk round the streets in good peace, saying hello, helping people. We have families, we hug. We love our kids, we love each other, This is what we need to enhance. We need to extend that through our technologies, and that needs to work for us, to help us do that across the world, at distance, across time and space. And we're moving towards that, and we can see, I think, today, just listening, there's been lots around the body, but one of the things I always say into these more business conference scenarios is, if you're starting a business or you have a business which has got any tech to do with the body, then make sure you've got a body expert in your core team, whether it's a physiotherapist, a biologist, a neurologist, whether it's a dancer, a choreographer. Make sure you've got that core person who really understands and knows the body-mind interface, who knows it intuitively in them, right at the center of your project team, and make sure that you're doing the user experience from that point and integrating from that point, not too far down line. That's when it goes wrong. We get this gear, and it doesn't really work for us.
It's so fascinating to hear both of you speak about the cyborg and not use that word, thank goodness, enhance.
Enhancement.
Because the assumption is when we have discussions about cyborg, it's how do I make myself better, faster, stronger, more enhanced? And yet that really shouldn't be the aim. We should allow for this spectrum of difference, this spectrum of possibility, this spectrum of differentiated senses. I mean, then the question becomes, how do we allow for a multitude of differentiated sorts of humans and differentiated sorts of human experience to exist and coalesce in the world when we can't even get this human thing right half the time?
Yeah, I think that's why for us, like, that we wanted to also create this society about the trans-species society, because transhumanism and all this is all very human, and also like the what you said about enhancing, because I think it's very subjective and very personal. Maybe to feel all the earthquakes is worse. I mean, to be better or worse is a very subjective thing. Maybe like to feel, like for some people, that's why I think everyone can decide what they want. Maybe some people want to feel less. So also I think it's important, like, trans-species, well, we created this term because I don't feel I'm 100% human, because I have a new sense that this is not a human sense, so that's why. But also to be distinguished about the transhuman is because it's more, for me, it's more horizontal. It's not about getting better, because getting better is very subjective. It's just having an alternative way of of experiencing the reality, and then you decide if it's better or worse. It's
creating those new reality tunnels,
exactly.
to borrow a phrase. And Ghislane, your thoughts on that idea, the idea that it shouldn't always be about enhancement, maybe it's about more intimacy. We talk about artificial intelligence, but we never talk about artificial empathy. I mean, how do we change the focus when it comes to thinking about where technology and the body collide?
Well, the origins of artificial intelligence were actually in a much more emotional base, and the discussion, of course, about artificial intelligence is our fear is how it will become emotive and tell us, be sentient as such. So that discussion is still there, whether that's a reality fear or not. I think for me, it's much more about how we blend into this particular revolution, change in our society and the way we live, which happens to be digital, and we're going to have more quantum, etc., come onto us. So how do we actually create a virtual physical blending which makes life easy and complementary? And mixed reality is a clear area that this is coming through in. And a lot of the work that I've done in telepresence across the years is directly transferable into the mixed reality scenario, because you are having to navigate and orientate yourself, use gestures, mid-air gestures, stuff, etc., to move through mixed realities, to work with augmented realities. And this is quite natural. It's becoming much more of a natural way to be. So when we can flow through, it's not even about enhancing, it's just finding our way into a flow with the technology in us in a complementary way.
That's a beautiful idea, but the audience questions seem to want to know more practical things, such as Moon, and it's the question I had to ask you too. I mean, how do you charge the implant?
Yeah, you asked me that before. What do you see the question? Okay.
Where's the energy coming from? I mean, how do you plug yourself in at night to ensure that you can be a cyborg in the next morning?
Yeah, I guess when you become, well, my aim is to be able to charge myself, but now I use induction. So when you are a cyborg, yes, apart from eating and sleeping, I also need to charge my new sense through induction. Yeah.
And Ghislane, there's so many questions here about the issue of competition when it comes to enhanced human individuals. But I think to step back from that and have a discussion around, what is it that makes this form of technology so important and so interesting to explore in an arts and, more importantly, dance context? What will we learn by exploring it in this way?
I think we've learned a lot already. I think there's been some amazing pioneer work done with wearables, with prostheses. I mean, Steve Mann, the pioneer who actually was wearing glasses like Google Glass from the late 80s. Stellark, who some of you may know, Australian artist who's worked a lot with implants, prosthesis in many different ways. Looking at the art sector and also at the robotics sector, there's a heck of a lot that will transfer into the body technologies of the future. And I see there's a question about sports, and sports is a really good example because we are at a point in sports where we're having to discuss maybe a difference. Maybe in 10 years' time there'll be the body natural Olympics where you don't have any additionalities at all. There'll be the Paralympics, which has been amazing. Look how popular that's been to see people who couldn't partake before in the Olympics actually, obviously leading the way in a superpower kind of way, but also possibly the Olympics, which does allow people to enhance themselves with drugs, and they possibly be ranked alongside each other. And this is already happening, an acceptance that there's different types of ways you can go, and difference is okay, yeah?
Moon, let me ask you, as the final question, I guess, what is your hope for the future of cyborgs? I mean, you've almost teased that you want to see maybe sense-o-nauts and other sorts of ways to explore the world. I mean, what sort of things are you hoping for?
I usually my wish when I do the performances or the talks is usually like this thought that is already very in our society, that this technology is cold, that it has nothing to do with ours, that maybe it's a natural way. I mean, And also in this human thing that usually, I was in some debate about AI and they say to make machines better, they should be more human. And it's like, well, but humans maybe are not that good. I mean, we've been actually a terrible species. We kill other species, like we destroy the planet. And also we haven't always been humans, no? We used to be bacteria, we went on the sea, we went the trees. Now we are humans, and now we'll become something else because we unite the technology. So maybe it's something natural that we don't need to be scared of. And actually also my wish is like actually united to technology that people can create more empathy towards the other species and towards the planet. That would be like my wish.
And Ghislane, where would you like to see the future development of this sort of work?
I think we need a really good debate about personal data, about the security of personal data for all of us, whether it's within the implants or whether it's beyond that. I think we need personal data dashboards, and we need to have a control ourselves of what we choose to give anonymously into research, medical, into big world concerns, what we choose to say, no, I don't want my data used, what we choose to share, maybe between the three of us, whatever. Those choices are there in other social media, like at the back end of other social media. It's not a big deal. What's very important for business is to really consider that this isn't just about making money from data for your business. It's about your data, it's about your children's data and your grandchildren's data. So actually, it's got to be a win-win. The ethics are clear. What decisions we make in the next 5 years are going to affect our children and our grandchildren onwards, and how they exist and whether they have any sense of personal identity and ownership of their own identities onwards. So that debate needs to happen now between business, between governments, and between us, the people, and we are all here. We need to think about that for ourselves.
So on that note, it sounds like we have a lot of choices to make as individuals and as an audience, and we'll have to make choices around the sorts of ways in which these technologies might radically alter our bodies. We might have to decide how we're going to design new senses, or in fact redesign the senses that we already have, and each individually will have to start making decisions about how we might choose to navigate the world in vastly differentiated ways. So I want to end with a warning, because we've been talking about the future, and the warning is this. Because when it comes to thinking about the future remains unknown. And many things that may seem imminent or inevitable may also not actually happen. But fortunately, our ability to survive the future is not predicated on our capacity for prediction, although, and on those much more rare occasions, something remarkable may come of staring the future deep in the eyes and challenging everything that it seems to promise. I hope you feel you've done that today. I hope you feel you've done that at Pioneers. Have an incredible conference. Please join me in thanking these two incredible individuals.
It's nice, and you too. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Luke, Moon, and Ghislane. Nicely done, man.
Thank you.
Well done, my dear.